All right, today we're tackling a really fascinating and honestly, a pretty complex area of Islamic law known as khulʿ. You can think of it as a pathway for a wife to initiate a divorce, but as we'll see, it's tied up with some incredibly detailed rules about financial compensation. So, here's how we're going to break this all down. First, we'll get a handle on what khulʿ actually is. Then, we'll look into the price of that separation. After that, we dive into the tricky situations where compensation goes wrong. Then, and this is my favorite part, we'll see how a single word can change the entire outcome. And finally, we'll touch on the important principles around guardianship.
Okay, first things first. We've got to build a solid foundation here. So what exactly is khulʿ? And where does this whole idea even come from in Islamic law?
At its absolute core, khulʿ is a separation that's put in motion by the wife. It really functions like a kind of transaction. She offers up some form of financial compensation, and you'll even see it referred to as a ransom in order to be released from the marriage contract.
And this isn't some later legal invention. It's grounded directly in the Quran. What's so important here is how it's framed. It's not presented as a failure or something shameful, but as a completely valid, blameless option for when a marriage just hits a point of irreconcilable discord.
Now, this is absolutely crucial to understand. The legal effect here is final. A khulʿ triggers a single, irrevocable divorce. This isn't a cooling-off period or a trial separation. Once it's done, it's done. The marriage is over, and that compensation she promised, it becomes a real, legally binding debt. Okay, but how much compensation are we talking about? Well, this is where things get really nuanced. The rules aren't just one size fits all. In fact, a huge factor is who is seen as the source of the marital problems. And you can see this incredible principle of fairness at play right here. The law essentially asks, okay, where's the discord coming from? If the problems are stemming from the husband, it's considered morally wrong for him to take a single penny from her. If the wife is the one seeking a way out, it's disliked for him to try and profit from the situation by taking more than the original dowry or mahar that he gave her when they got married. And look, this isn't just some abstract theory. It's rooted in a real, famous historical case. When the wife of a man named Thabit ibn Qais wanted a separation, the Prophet himself gave the guideline. The husband gets the dowry back, but as for any increase, no.
This brings us to a really fascinating split that you see often in Islamic law, the difference between what's morally ideal and what's legally enforceable. So while it might be disliked for a husband to take more than the dowry, if he does, and it was part of the agreement, the court will actually uphold the deal. The moral realm and the legal realm are distinct.
All right, so that's the ideal scenario, but life is messy. What happens when the compensation itself is problematic? What if it's something Islam considers forbidden? This is where the legal logic gets incredibly detailed.
This is a classic what if that jurists have debated for centuries. Let's say a wife offers and the husband agrees to compensation that has zero legal value in Islam, like wine. Does the divorce still count? Does anyone know anything? What happens?
And the answer, amazingly, all comes down to the specific words that were used. If the term khulā was used, which is an indirect term for separation, the divorce is irrevocable, even though the payment totally failed. But if an explicit term for divorce was used, it's considered revocable. Either way, since the payment was invalid from the start, she doesn't owe him anything. So the big takeaway here is that the word khulʿ itself carries so much weight. It signals an unmistakable intent for a final, complete break. And the law honors that intent. So even if the financial part of the deal falls through because it was invalid, the core of the agreement, the irrevocable separation, still stands.
You think we've gotten detailed so far? Oh, just wait. We're about to see how a single, tiny word, a preposition of all things, can completely flip the entire ruling of a case on its head. This is where it gets really amazing.
Okay, check this out. Case number 1. A wife says to her husband, "Divorce me 3 times for $1,000. Now, I want you to really lock in on that word for. In Arabic, it signals a direct one-to-one exchange. So, because for implies a divisible transaction, if the husband only delivers 1/3 of her request, that is, just 1 divorce instead of 3, then she only owes 1/3 of the payment. And because a payment was involved, that 1 divorce becomes irrevocable. Makes sense, right? It's like a partial fulfillment of a contract. Now watch this. Same exact request, but she changes one tiny word. She says, "Divorce me 3 times upon 1,000. That word upon can be interpreted differently. It might not just mean an exchange, it could imply a condition.
and this possibility opens up a massive legal debate.
And this right here is just a masterclass in legal reasoning. The great jurist Abu Hanifa argued that a pawn set a condition. Since the husband didn't meet the full condition of 3 divorces, the deal's off, the divorce is revocable, and she owes nothing. But his 2 most brilliant students, Abu Yusuf and Muhammad, disagreed. They said, come on, a pawn here basically means the same thing as 4, and they ruled the same ways in the first case. The entire outcome hinges on how you interpret one word. It's incredible.
This just drives the point home. Look how literal and precise the language has to be. If she says, divorce me for what's in my hand, and her hand is empty, she owes nothing. But if she just adds 2 little words, of wealth, the law says, okay, she meant some kind of wealth, and the obligation defaults back to her original dowry. The details are literally everything.
Okay, for our last section, let's shift gears a little bit. Let's talk about how the system protects those who might be vulnerable. Specifically, how all these rules work when a minor is involved in a marriage. This is a really important safeguard. A father or a guardian simply cannot dip into his minor daughter's own property or wealth to pay for her khulʼ. Why? Because the law sees no clear benefit for her in that transaction. She's just losing her wealth. It's a fundamental protection.
But, and this is a critical distinction, while he can't use her money, he is allowed to use his own. He can step in and act as the guarantor for the payment. If he does that, the khulʼ is perfectly valid. But the financial responsibility falls squarely on his shoulders, not his daughter's. And, very importantly, her original dowry is protected and remains her property.
So when you step back and look at the whole picture, what you see is this remarkably detailed system. It's a precise balance of transactional logic, incredibly deep linguistic nuance, and a powerful undercurrent of moral responsibility. And if you really want to get into the nitty-gritty of the original text we've been discussing, you've got to check out the link in the description.
And all this leaves us with one final big question to chew on. In our modern world, where we often think about contracts and rights in very rigid ways, how does a 1,000-year-old legal framework like this, one that's so focused on intents, on fairness, and on linguistic nuance, challenge or maybe even inform our own ideas about what marriage, divorce, and freedom really mean?